His blood was on my hands before I even knew his name. Warm, metallic, steaming in the cold night air, it soaked into my palms as he collapsed against me with a sound that was half a gasp, half a growl. I remember thinking distantly that a dying man should not have eyes that bright. Red, not the dull red of bursting veins, but something alive, burning, aware. I should have dropped him. I should have run. Instead, I held him tighter as his chest shattered under my fingers, feeling a power in him that death had not yet claimed. "Don't scream," he whispered, his voice steady despite the hole in his side. That was my first mistake. I didn't scream. I listened. And in that heartbeat of silence, I felt something ancient wake inside him and inside me. I am a woman who has always trusted her instincts, and that night, every instinct I had was screaming that I was in danger. Yet my feet stayed rooted to the dark pavement behind the closed cafe where I worked. The streetlight flickered above us, weak and unreliable, casting shadows that stretched and twisted like living things. "You're bleeding badly," I said, my voice trembling despite my effort to sound calm. He glanced at the wound as if it were an inconvenience, not a mortal threat. "It will stop," he replied. I almost laughed at the madness of it. No one bleeds like that and survives. But even as I spoke, the blood slowed. I watched skin knit itself together. My breath caught in my throat, and fear slid cold down my spine. I knew then that this was no ordinary man. He pulled away suddenly, stronger than someone with seconds to live should ever be. He straightened, wiping the last of the blood from his side as though erasing a minor spill. "You shouldn't be here alone at night," he said quietly. There was no threat in his tone, only warning. "Neither should you," I snapped, my fear turning into anger to mask the shaking in my knees. He looked at me for a long moment, studying my face as though weighing a decision that could not be undone. Then he gave me his name, or at least the name he chose to use, Elias. I didn't know then that names are fragile things to creatures like him. He turned and vanished into the darkness with a speed that stole the air from my lungs. Sleep never came that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the wound closing beneath my hands, the impossible healing replaying itself in cruel detail. By morning, I convinced myself it had been shock, or adrenaline, or my own imagination spiraling out of control. By evening, when Elias returned as if stepping out of the very shadows that had swallowed him the night before, my excuses shattered. He looked and touched and heard and impossibly calm. "You shouldn't remember that so clearly," he said softly, sitting across from me at an outdoor table as if we were strangers meeting by chance. My heart hammered against my ribs. "I remember everything," I replied. And that was the moment I saw regret flicker across his face. We began to talk after that, in careful fragments. About ordinary things, about the weather, about the bitter taste of the coffee, about anything except what he was. I told myself I was gathering evidence, that curiosity was my only motive. But the truth was simpler and more dangerous. I was drawn to him. There was a weight to his silence, a sorrow in his eyes that made me feel as if he had lived 100 lives and buried them all. Sometimes he would watch people pass with a hunger he barely concealed, his fingers curling around his glass until the metal bent. "You're afraid of me," he said one evening. I shook my head, lying. The fear was there. Yes, but it tangled with something warmer, something reckless. The first time he saved me, he did it without thinking. The alley behind the cafe was quiet to quiet when the footsteps began to follow me. Two men, drunk and angry, blocking my path with grins that promised violence. My phone slipped from my hand as panic rose in my throat. I didn't even see Elias move. One moment he was nowhere. The next, he stood between me and them. The air changed. The men froze as if they sensed a predator they could not name. "Leave," Elias said softly. They ran, not stumbled ran, screaming into the night. When I turned to thank him, his face was twisted with effort, as though he were holding himself back from something far worse. "You shouldn't have done that," I whispered. "For them," he replied. Or for me, after that, the questions burned in my mouth. What are you? How old are you? How many have you killed? But I asked none of them. Instead, I asked smaller things. Where he lived. Why he stayed in this forgotten corner of the city. He answered vaguely, always skirting the truth with the skill of someone who had practiced lying for centuries. Yet in rare and guarded moments, I saw the conflict tear through him, the predator and the protector locked in endless war. I don't choose who I am, he told me once, staring at the dark river behind the cafe. I only choose who I harm. That should have frightened me more than it did. The night the secret began to unravel, the air was thick with storm and unease. Elias was late, later than he had ever been. When he finally appeared, his clothes were torn, his skin ashen beneath its unnatural calm. We have to leave, he said urgently, his hand gripping my wrist with a strength that borderline pain. Now I pulled free. Why? What happened? His eyes flashed red, brighter than I had ever seen them. They found me. My stomach dropped. Who? He hesitated, just for a second too long. In the distance, I heard sirens rise like hunting cries. Elias looked at me with something that felt like apology and despair woven together. The ones who made me, he said. And before I could ask anything more, the ground behind him exploded in a burst of fire and shadow. The explosion threw me backward, the force slamming the air from my lungs as heat rushed over my skin like a living thing. I hit the wet pavement hard, pain flaring up my spine, my ears ringing with a shrill, endless whine. For a moment, the world dissolved into smoke and sparks and a taste of burning oil on my tongue. When I could see again, the alley was on fire. The brick wall behind where Elias had been standing was scorched black, cracked open like a wound. I scrambled to my knees, huffing, terror clawing up my throat. Elias! I screamed, my voice breaking as I searched through the smoke. Then I saw him. He stood at the edge of the flames and touched, eyes glowing like embers in the dark. The fire bent away from him as if it feared him. My heart pounded in my chest with a single, terrible realization. Whatever hunted him tonight was not human either. He reached me in a blink, hauling me to my feet with one arm wrapped tightly around my waist. Don't look back, he ordered. I didn't argue. We ran. The city blurred into streaks of neon and shadow as he moved with impossible speed, rooftops and alleys flashing past in disorienting fragments. The wind cut into my face, stealing my breath, but I clung to him, too shocked to scream. Somewhere behind us, another blast shook the ground, glass shattering in a rain of deadly glitter. They're close, he muttered. Who are they? I cried. Later, he said, too sharply. He leapt, and suddenly the street vanished beneath us as we landed on the low rooftop of an abandoned building. My scream was ripped away by the rush of air and fear. We didn't stop moving. Elias sprinted across the roof, vaulted a fallen billboard, and dropped down into a maze of narrow back streets. My mind struggled to keep up with what my eyes were seeing. This was no longer the slow, quiet monster of whispered legends. This was something honed for survival and war. I felt his body tense with every sound, every flicker of movement in the dark. At last he slowed, ducking us into the shell of a burned-out warehouse near the river. He set me down behind a rusted stack of crates and crouched in front of me, his hands gripping my shoulders. No matter what you hear, no matter what you see, do not move, he said. His voice was urgent, raw. If they find you, they will use you. My blood ran cold. Use me for what? I asked. He didn't answer. He stood and vanished into the shadows before I could grab him. The warehouse was a grave of metal and dust, moonlight barely filtering through holes in the collapsing roof. Every sound was amplified, the drip of water, the distant echo of sirens, the thunder of my own heartbeat. I pressed my hand to my mouth to quiet my breathing. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Then I heard voices, not shouting, not normal speech. Low, murmured words that crawled along the walls like insects. Shapes moved at the far end of the warehouse, their silhouettes distorted and wrong, as if the shadows themselves had learned to walk. One of them laughed softly, a sound empty of humor. "He's here," the voice said calmly. I can smell the guilt on him, my stomach twisted in fear. I wanted to call out to Elias to warn him, but terror locked my throat. The fight erupted without warning. A blur of motion slammed into the nearest shadow, sending it crashing through a stack of old machinery. The sound of tearing metal screamed through the air. Elias moved faster than thought, his body a streak of darkness and fire as he struck again and again. But he was no longer the only monster in the room. The shadows fought back with inhuman strength, their bodies bending in ways that made my vision swim. One of them caught Elias mid-leap and hurled him across the floor like a broken doll. He slammed into a concrete pillar hard enough to crack it. I gasped, clamping down on the sound just in time. "You always were too sentimental," another voice mocked. "That is why you failed." Elias rose slowly, blood darkening his shirt where the stone had bitten into him. His eyes burned brighter, his control visibly shredding. "You should not have come," he said, his voice layered now with something deeper, something not entirely his own. The shadows circled him, patient and cruel. "You run from us," one of them replied. "You stole what was not yours. You hid among humans and played at mercy. Now you belong to us again." My hands shook so badly I nearly dropped my phone as desperation overcame fear. I dialed emergency services with clumsy fingers, pressing the device to the floor to silence it, whispering words I barely understood myself. But I knew, even as I tried to summon help, that no ordinary force would matter in this place. One of the shadows moved toward my hiding place. I saw it pause, its head tilting slightly as if scenting the air. My pulse thundered in my ears. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing my body to become invisible. "She's close," the shadow said softly. A thrill of terror shot through me. "No," Elias roared. The sound was feral, stripped of restraint and humanity. He collided with the shadow like a storm made of flesh and rage. The two of them slammed into the far wall, tearing through rusted steel as if it were paper. The others hesitated, momentarily wary. I stared at Elias in that moment and saw the full truth of him, his power, his violence, his desperate restraint. And beneath all of it, the terrible weight of his compassion. The fighting intensified, crashing through the warehouse in waves of destruction. Each strike sent shockwaves through the floor beneath me. I crawled backward, inch by inch, my body moving on pure instinct. Then everything went wrong. A hand burst through the crate beside me and closed around my ankle with icy strength. I screamed as I was yanked into the open. The shadow lifted me with effortless ease, its face a blur of shifting darkness, its eyes dull and hungry. "This is what you hide for," it hissed, dragging a claw along the air inches from my skin. So fragile, so loud, across the warehouse, Elias turned. Our eyes met across the chaos. The raw panic on his face shattered something in me. "Let her go," he roared. The shadow laughed. Or what? The answer came in the form of Elias launching himself at us with a speed born of pure desperation. But the shadow tightened its grip, pulling me closer as its voice dropped to a whisper. "One more step," it warned, "and she dies." The shadow's grip crushed the breath from my lungs, cold seeping through my skin as if my blood itself were being touched by winter. My feet dangled uselessly above the concrete, my hands clawing at an arm that felt more like living smoke than flesh. Elias froze mid-lunge, his body coiled with lethal force just waiting to be released. His eyes burned so fiercely I felt the heat of them from where I hung. "You don't want this," he said, each word carved from restraint. "You don't understand what you're holding." The shadow drew me closer to its faceless mass, and for the first time I felt its breath stale, ancient, poisoned with rot. "I understand perfectly," it replied. "She is your weakness. And weakness is how we break you." I struggled, panic tearing through me in jagged waves. My pulse pounded so loudly I was sure everyone could hear it. Images of my life flashed in brutal clarity: my small apartment, the cafe, The quiet nights I used to think were lonely before I ever met Elias, I realized with a sick twist of fear how much of my sense of safety had become tied to him. The shadow's grip tightened as if it sensed my thoughts. Pain shot up my leg in blinding streaks. "Stop," I gasped, the word barely escaping my throat. Elias took one step forward despite the threat. The shadow jerked me closer to its face. "Another step and she bleeds," it said calmly. Elias stopped. The silence that followed was heavy enough to crush. "You swore an oath," one of the other shadows called from the far end of the warehouse. "You swore to us, Elias, to the circle." The name sent a visible shudder through him. I saw his jaw lock, saw the old wounds tear themselves open behind his eyes. "That oath died the night you murdered the children," he snapped. My stomach lurched. "Murdered children." The words echoed inside my head like a scream trapped in a cave. The shadow holding me laughed softly. "We perfected them," it corrected. "We made them eternal." "As we made you," I felt Elias's conflict ripple through the air like a living force. Whatever he was, whoever he had been, was bound to these creatures by something deeper than fear, by guilt. The shadow leaned closer to me. "Do you know why he won't attack?" it whispered. "Because we still own his blood." My vision blurred as the cold intensified. "Your death would free him," it continued thoughtfully. "But he is too attached to you to allow that." Elias's voice broke through like a blade. "I will destroy you all before I let her die." One of the shadows chuckled. "Your rage is impressive," it said. "But your problem has always been the same. You care too much." With a sudden jerk, it hurled me across the warehouse. I screamed as my body slammed into the concrete floor, the impact driving all the air from my lungs in a violent burst of pain. I lay there stunned, white stars exploding behind my eyes, unable to breathe. The sounds of battle exploded again around me. Metal screamed, stone shattered. I rolled weakly onto my side, gasping for air as my ribs protested with grinding agony. Through the haze, I saw Elias tear through one of the shadows with savage force, slamming it again and again into the floor until its form dissolved into writhing darkness. But the others closed in on him at once, striking from all sides. Claws ripped through his coat. Blood splattered the concrete in dark arcs. He did not slow. He fought like a living storm driven by fury and something even more dangerous, desperation. I tried to crawl toward him, my limbs trembling violently beneath me. Every movement sent fresh agony through my body, but I couldn't stay still. "Elias," I choked. My voice sounded small and broken in the chaos. One of the shadows noticed my movement and darted toward me with terrifying speed. Elias saw it at the same instant. He screamed my name, the sound raw and unrestrained, and hurled a massive steel beam across the warehouse. It struck the shadow mid-charge, pinning it to the far wall with a thunderous crash. Dust and debris rained from the ceiling. For a heartbeat, everything paused. Elias turned to me, his chest heaving, his eyes glowing brighter than ever. "Get up," he commanded. "Run toward the river." "Do not stop for anything." I pushed myself upright using a broken crate, pain screaming through my body as I staggered backward. Before I could take a step, the shadow pinned to the wall began to laugh. The sound was wet and bubbling. "Too late," it said. The warehouse doors at the far end exploded inward, torn from their hinges by an unseen force. A new presence flooded the room, heavier, colder, more terrifying than the others combined. The shadows fell back instantly, bowing their heads in silent obedience. Elias went utterly still. From the darkness beyond the broken doors, a tall figure emerged, its shape terrifyingly solid compared to the shifting forms of the others. Its eyes were pale and empty, like moons carved from bone. The air around it seemed to die. "You have betrayed us for the last time, Elias," it said in a voice that sounded like many voices speaking at once. "And you," it added, turning its empty gaze toward me, "are the reason." My legs gave way beneath me. Elias stepped between the figure and me without hesitation, his body tense with a terrible, final resolve. "She has nothing to do with this," he said. "Take me." And it with me, the figure tilted its head as if amused. "Oh, we will take you," it replied. But not before she watches you fall. The shadows surged forward in a coordinated wave. Elias launched himself into them with a roar that shook the shattered walls. I watched in helpless terror as he was swallowed by darkness, his glowing eyes the last thing visible before the mass closed around him. I screamed his name again and again until my throat burned raw, until my voice broke into nothing but air. The tall figure advanced toward me, each step slow and deliberate, dragging fear along behind it like a living shadow. I tried to crawl away, but my body refused to obey. As the creature loomed over me, it raised one long, pale hand and pointed toward the writhing darkness consuming Elias. "Your love will be his undoing," it said softly. And then Elias's eyes vanished completely beneath the swarm. I can still feel the weight of that moment, like a stone pressing down on my chest. The warehouse was silent, save for the occasional drip of water and the whisper of debris shifting under some invisible force. Elias was gone. The shadows had swallowed him whole, and I was left crouched behind a rusted crate, trembling, my lungs burning with every shallow breath. My body refused to move, paralyzed by a terror that clawed at every fiber of me. And yet, somewhere deep inside, I knew that giving up was not an option, not when Elias was still alive somewhere in that chaos. I forced my trembling hands to the floor, pushing myself forward inch by inch, ignoring the searing pain lancing through my ribs and legs. Every heartbeat was a prayer, a desperate plea for him to survive. Then, suddenly, everything went quiet. The writhing shadows froze mid-motion, and a tall figure stepped into view. Its eyes, pale and unfeeling, turned toward me. I stumbled to my knees, unsure if it was hunger, curiosity, or some cruel sense of amusement that had made it pause. "You are resilient," it said, its voice calm, almost admiring. "Tell me, why my throat was raw?" Because I can't let him die," I croaked, barely audible. The creature tilted its head, silent for a moment, studying me as though it could see every corner of my soul. Then it whispered, almost to itself, "Interesting, perhaps. We shall see." With a gesture, it indicated the darkness where Elias had disappeared. Without thinking, I darted forward, fear outweighed by stubborn determination. The shadows surrounding the mass thinned as if obeying the tall figure, granting me a narrow path to the writhing darkness. I could hear Elias screaming, a sound that tore through me more sharply than the shadows ever could. "Elias!" I shouted. He paused, even in the chaos, and our eyes met for the briefest second. His glowing gaze, full of anger, pain, and desperation, held me steady. I pushed past exhaustion and fear, grabbing a fallen pipe from the floor and swinging it blindly at the nearest tendrils of darkness. Sparks of light erupted where metal met shadow, and I felt a brief surge of hope. Elias's roar cut through the warehouse, sharper than anything I had ever heard, and the shadows recoiled, writhing in pain. Then he emerged from the darkness, blooded, battered, but alive. His red eyes blazed brighter than ever, filled with fury and unspoken gratitude. He moved toward me with a grace that defied reason, striking at the shadows with devastating precision. "Run!" he barked between strikes, his voice commanding, "Run!" Now, I didn't argue. I scrambled toward the warehouse doors, Elias clearing a path behind me. The tall figure raised a hand, summoning a wall of shadows to block our escape, but Elias, with a feral scream, tore through it like paper, unstoppable. We burst into the open night, the cool air hitting us like salvation. My lungs burned as I ran alongside him, stumbling but refusing to look back. The city streets were eerily quiet, sirens faint in the distance, but the weight of what we had escaped pressed down on me. Elias slowed only when we reached the edge of the river, pulling me behind a low wall. He dropped to his knees, clutching his side where a deep tear ran across his coat. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice almost soft, fragile compared to the destruction he had just wrought. I shook my head, trembling. "But you?" I whispered. "You're bleeding." He smirked faintly, a shadow of his usual calm, and touched his cheek. The wound was gone, just like before. I realized then that Elias was not just powerful. He was terrifyingly, impossibly immortal. And yet, despite the chaos, despite the blood, he had protected me, all of me. My fear began to mingle with something else relief, yes, but also a dawning understanding of what our connection had become. They'll come back, I said finally, my voice low, and when they do. He shook his head, eyes scanning the river, calculating, ancient and unreadable. Then we'll be ready, he said. Together. I wanted to believe it. I had to. That night, as the city slept unaware of the horrors that had unfolded in the shadows, I sat beside Elias on the riverbank. He was quiet, lost in thought, and I couldn't tear my eyes from him. I realized something crucial. He was more than a vampire, more than the danger I had feared. He was a guardian of a world I had never known existed. But he was also human in the ways that mattered most: compassion, loyalty, guilt, love. Perhaps that was what made him both beautiful and deadly. The river lapped quietly against the stones as I rested my head against his shoulder, feeling his heartbeat steady, real, alive. In the distance, the first hints of dawn touched the skyline, soft and fragile, like hope after endless darkness. I knew this was far from over. The shadows would return. The tall figure would find him again, but for now, in this stolen moment, we survived. We were still together, and that was enough. I traced a hand along his arm, feeling the pulse of power, and danger beneath the skin. Thank you, I whispered. He only shook his head, eyes fixed on the horizon. No, he said softly, thank you for staying. And in that moment, I understood that survival was never just about fleeing. It was about choosing who to trust, who to fight for, and who to live for even in the darkness. The streets were empty, eerily silent as Elias and I moved through the city's shadows. Even in victory, I could feel the weight of what had happened pressing down on us. The tall figure hadn't disappeared, it had retreated, but I knew better than to assume it was gone. Elias kept glancing over his shoulder, his glowing red eyes cutting through the darkness, scanning for movement. My own heart thudded like a drum inside my chest, and I couldn't shake the sense that every alley, every corner, hid another threat. They'll come back, I whispered, almost to myself. Elias didn't reply at first. Then he muttered, and when they do, we fight. We survive. Together, we reached a narrow street where the lampposts flickered weakly, shadows pooling like ink across the cracked pavement. Elias stopped abruptly, crouching low, his body coiled and tense. Something's close, he hissed. I strained my ears but heard nothing beyond the faint hum of the city. Then I sensed its movement, subtle, predatory, like a predator circling its prey. My stomach twisted in fear. Who is it? I asked, my voice trembling. Elias's eyes narrowed. Not who, what? The circle is here. He didn't elaborate, but I understood. These were the creatures bound to him by blood, ancient and relentless. Without warning, the shadows struck. They moved faster than I could comprehend, slamming into the street with a force that rattled the air around us. Elias reacted instantly, a blur of red and black, striking with precision and strength that defied reason. I tried to keep up, my own fear driving me to act, swinging a broken pipe at the nearest tendril of shadow. Sparks erupted where it met the darkness, but they kept coming, wave after wave. I realized with mounting terror that tonight's fight was not about survival alone, it was about endurance, strategy, and understanding Elias in ways I never had before. The shadows seemed to learn, adapting to Elias's attacks, circling us with an intelligence that was almost human. One of them lunged at me, faster than I could react. My hands met empty air as it passed, then a second figure slammed into the side of my leg, throwing me to the pavement. Pain lanced through my body, but I forced myself to move, crawling to the nearest alley as Elias roared behind me. His fury was tangible, cutting through the shadows like a blade. I caught sight of him in the dim streetlight, his movements fluid, precise, every strike a mixture of power and control. And yet, there was something I hadn't seen before: exhaustion. Even his immortality had limits. Then I heard a voice, faint but unmistakable, carried over the chaos: Elias. The name hung in the air, soft, accusing, familiar. My heart skipped a beat. I realized immediately who it was: one of his own. Someone or something he had once trusted, now turned against him. The shadows hesitated at the sound, a flicker of recognition passing through their forms. Elias froze momentarily, his gaze sharp, wary. "No," he muttered, almost to himself. "It can't be." My blood ran cold. Betrayal was never far from him, but I hadn't expected it tonight, not now. A figure emerged from the smoke and darkness, another vampire, older, taller, with eyes as red as Elias's own. "You've hidden too long," the stranger said, voice cold and commanding. "The circle wants its due." Elias's jaw clenched. "I serve no one," he replied. The tension between them was electric, dangerous. I crouched behind a dumpster, every instinct screaming at me to stay hidden, to survive. But part of me wanted to move forward, to intervene, even knowing it could cost my life. I couldn't just watch him face this alone. The battle escalated in a blur of movement. Shadows twisted around them, slashing, tearing, bending the world into chaos. I scrambled toward Elias, ducking and dodging where the shadows lunged at me. Sparks and dark tendrils filled the street. Elias's strikes were faster than thought, but even he couldn't strike them all. I realized, with a mix of fear and admiration, that his power wasn't just strength, it was control, restraint, a battle not just of force but of mind. And yet, for all his power, I knew he feared something tonight. That was the first time I truly understood. He was powerful, terrifying, immortal, but not invincible. And neither of us would leave this night unchanged. Finally, in the middle of the chaos, the older vampire lunged at Elias, teeth bared, hands clawed. Elias met him with a force that sent a shockwave across the street. I stumbled back, watching in horror and awe. And then Elias spoke, his voice low, full of authority I had never heard before. "You leave now, or you die." The stranger hesitated, just for a moment, then retreated, shadows parting around him as if the darkness itself obeyed Elias. He turned to me, eyes still blazing. "This isn't over," he said, voice low. "Not tonight, but you. You've seen too much now, you understand. You can't leave me to fight alone again." My pulse raced. I nodded, knowing he was right. I was in this with him, whatever it cost. The first pale light of dawn broke over the city, casting long shadows across the streets and river banks. Elias and I moved quietly, each step measured, careful. The night's battle had left the city scarred, but the real danger wasn't gone. It had simply withdrawn, waiting. I watched him as he walked ahead, his red eyes dimmed to a faint glow in the morning light, his movements precise, almost predatory. Even after all I had seen, I still felt the pull of him, the mix of danger and protection that defined him. I realized, painfully, that my life was now intertwined with his in ways I couldn't escape. We reached the edge of the river, where the city's skyline reflected faintly in the water. Elias knelt and pressed his hand against the smooth stone, his face shadowed in concentration. I approached cautiously, unsure if I dared to speak. "Elias," I whispered. He didn't look up, but I felt the weight of his attention settle on me like a physical thing. "The circle will come for you," I said, almost more to myself than to him. "They'll never stop." His voice was calm, measured, but carried an undercurrent of steel. "And I will never let them take you, not ever." That is the truth of us. I swallowed hard, noticing the faint tremor in his hands. The battle, the betrayals, the relentless pursuit of the circle, none of it had left him untouched. "You've carried this alone for so long," I said softly. "All those secrets, all that guilt." He finally looked at me, his eyes revealing layers of regret I hadn't seen before. "I've lived a lifetime hiding my mistakes," he admitted. "I've protected people I should have destroyed. I've hunted those I should have spared, and yet, every choice I made led me here, to you. The intensity of his gaze made my chest tighten. He stood suddenly, the morning light catching the edge of his coat. You need to understand something, he continued. The circle, the shadows, the creatures, they are remnants of the world I swore to control. I've been hiding, surviving, manipulating. But my worst secret is this. I almost let them destroy me. I almost let them destroy us. I felt the truth of his words resonate in my bones. The man beside me was powerful, terrifying, almost untouchable, but he was also vulnerable, human in ways no one would suspect. And that vulnerability, it made him real. I stepped closer, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I touched his arm. I don't care about the past, I said. I care about now. I care about us. His expression softened, though the faint shadow of caution never left his eyes. And yet, he said quietly, danger follows. Always. The river lapped gently at our feet, the city slowly waking around us, indifferent to the horrors that had passed. For the first time, I realized that survival wasn't about avoiding danger, it was about choosing who to fight alongside, who to trust, who to live for. Suddenly, a whisper carried across the river, faint but unmistakable. A shadow detached itself from the far bank, moving toward us with purpose. I tensed, expecting another battle, another wave of destruction. But Elias only sighed, his hand resting lightly on my shoulder. Let it come, he said. Whatever comes, we face it together. No more running. No more hiding. My heart pounded, fear and relief warring inside me. I knew he was right. Whatever secrets he had hidden, whatever enemies still lurked in the darkness, we would face them as one. As the sun rose higher, painting the skyline with golden light, I felt a sense of clarity wash over me. Elias was no longer just the dangerous, haunted vampire I had first feared. He was protector, fighter, guardian, and now, in ways I couldn't ignore, my companion in survival. Are we ready? I asked, voice steady despite the trembling of my hands. He turned, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips, and nodded. Always, together, for the first time in months, I allowed myself to breathe fully, to feel the calm after the storm. We stood side by side, the river before us, the city around us, the shadows lurking just beyond the light. Whatever the circle planned, whatever threats awaited us, we would endure. And in that moment, I understood something essential. Life, even one shadowed by immortality, fear, and betrayal, was worth fighting for, not alone, but together. Elias's hand brushed mine, faintly, reassuringly. This is only the beginning, he said, but we survive. And we are stronger because of it. I nodded, heart filled with resolve, ready for whatever came next. Thank you for watching and listening to my story. Please subscribe for more stories.